Hey guys, what's going on? This is Brad from the Ed Army, and we're back as the next part of the theory going on for Pokemon Legends ZA is going to begin. As I did mention at the first video, this is actually connecting to the second one because they're all somewhat linearly together. So if you haven't seen the first video, go ahead and check it out before you watch this one, just because it will make more sense. But as we do know, let's get to it. So we are starting off with the next theory, and as you could tell by the thumbnail, this is how I believe the creation of Xerneas and Yveltal could have taken place by Zygarde. Now, there are a few things that actually do line up in explaining this besides just my previous theory. Now, one thing that I always thought was very strange for both the anime and the games is that Zygarde plays a minor role in the games, but takes a major role in the anime. Now, this always confused me because I did think it was easier to actually write around having Xerneas and Yveltal in the actual story. But I do believe that because Legends, or not even Legends, but Pokemon Z was not going to be made, they decided that they would use Zygarde in the role of both of the legendaries. But I do think there actually was more to this than just deciding to not use Xerneas and Yveltal in the anime as main focuses for the arcs. Now, my biggest reason for this actually falls in some of the problems we have with Gen 6's story that I think Legends ZA can expand on, and I'm obviously using my theory to expand on it too. So pretty much for my additional theory, because I'm going to go about it in the way that it connects to the last one, is we're continuing with the precipitous period that I called the Kalos Chaos period, which as mentioned in my last video, so I just want to give a couple seconds for a spoiler warning so people do not end up, not seeing it. So I'll give 3 more seconds. 1, 2, and 3. I hope you clicked off. Okay, so basically in my last one, if you could tell by the last thumbnail as well, there was another Pokemon I believe that was present in the ancient times, as I do believe the reason that Team Flare hunted down specifically Zygarde, both of the Zygarde cores in the anime, and succeeded in getting one was because Zygarde is more revered as the legendary Pokemon of the Kalos region, but it is not in the same sense that Xerneas and Yveltal are, because there's a richer history with Zygarde. Now, many people will be wondering, well, we do know that Xerneas and Yveltal did exist in the ancient past. That is true, but we have a past that's even further back than the past we're talking about in the games, which is where the focus of both Xerneas and Yveltal comes from. Now, for this, it will give pretty much an explanation to the situations we had and kind of get us up to this main purpose of where the games would line up, and to some degree how the anime would line up as well. So this is just me explaining it. Just because Legends ZA comes out doesn't mean that the anime continuity will link. Just putting it out there for you guys so I don't get a bunch of comments of people saying, well, this didn't happen, that didn't happen. The point is there's lots of different things that could happen and could be explained, but we're getting into it in a different manner. So obviously I'm going to start here as we get into the chaos period that I talked about, and we have Apocalypse, the Pokemon I have named. Effectively, it is, in my opinion, the purple Pokemon, not particularly a dragon or anything in particular. The point is this Pokemon is just representation of what was facing Zygarde in the past, the ancient past. As I do believe what happened, the last theory, was that the war, or a big period of warring times, happened between these two Pokemon, as Zygarde tried to enable order back into the world of Kalos, but Apocalypse didn't want that. After meeting with humans and spending time and being praised, it's pretty much have a swollen head, so to speak, and begins to assert its dominance over Zygarde, starting to a period of war between the people of Kalos and them fighting in amongst each other. Now, this ends up, at least in the time period I have, at the 25th and final battle of the Chaos period, the last known recording of what happened in terms of this period. Now, what would take place is, in the last previous wars and battles of the Chaos period, Zygarde would normally defeat Apocalypse, as Apocalypse would eventually leave, tend its wounds, and eventually this situation would happen. However, with Zygarde specifically going around the region every time, this was the final straw, as it realized that its role, as well as Apocalypse, had caused more destruction and destroyed the order of Kalos than either of them could have prior, as the graves that they visit of those who have died and the Pokemon that have perished has mounted up, and the ruins of cities and civilizations that have basically formed around the two Pokemon in order to prove who is right has led to just absolute chaos, as they are rubble and ruins, and has left Zygarde to make the final decision, as this war must come to an end. as in the last battle, as Apocalypse would wait to effectively be left alone, something different would happen, as Zygarde actually would grab its tail and begin pulling it. From itself, Zygarde would decide that it was time to make a big change to the region, and it did such that, as it began to utilize the energy that it had in its body. As I said in my prior theory, I do believe that Zygarde's 100% form is actually the correct form that it's supposed to be in all the time, but due to its own actions, there's something that eventually would cause it to effectively not be in its 100% form all the time. So this would be that, as I believe Zygarde would pump energy out of its body, effectively how it would, in a sense, merge its cores. It began to form two specific entity cores of its own body, these forming in red and blue. As Apocalypse would be pulled into the air, it was clear that these core energies were beginning to pull it in, as we would see a process that would reduce Zygarde's size completely and permanently, as 100% Zygarde, although being pretty massive, at this time would shrink, as it would pretty much compress a good amount of its power, half of its 100% power, into these two orbs, allowing it the ability to do what it needed to. As I think these orbs would eventually envelop Apocalypse, which at this point has been revered as the Pokemon that resided over life and death, as both these orbs and energies would entangle Apocalypse, pulling it together. As they would begin to envelop the Pokemon, many would probably wonder what was happening, as, to be fair, I think this would be better as a hidden history that's rediscovered in Legends ZA, whereas in the past, people did not witness this, as this was the final battle, and effectively, there was just no one around. So maybe Pokemon did, but people didn't. As Zygarde would watch, effectively the energy enveloped Apocalypse, and in time, it was clear of what was going to happen. And as a blinding light shined the area, it was done, as two specific orbs formed, and the silhouettes of creatures began to fill them. As the time progressed, Zygarde watched magnificently as two new Pokemon, two new lives were about to be born. Born from the ashes of Apocalypse, and the soul of the creature split in two and added the balance that Zygarde desperately wanted to achieve in the region. As when the orbs finally burst, two new Pokemon were finally born, this being Xerneas and Yveltal. As both of the Pokemon would land to the ground in this situation at the Battle of the War, they would know who Zygarde is, but they would have no idea about how they got there. Just understanding of the symbiotic balance that needs to be restored to the region, as both of them would find out that they have a lot of work to do, as both Xerneas and Yveltal understand their roles in the region and would go off in their own ways to go restore order. As this would leave Zygarde and the closing of the Chaos period for Kalos, which would be, I would argue, sometime of about 3,500 years, as it would set itself about the time before the war that we would eventually see in the Pokemon X and Y games. Now, this is done for a specific reason, but let's continue on with Zygarde. This is where Zygarde eventually decides to do the final act it needs in order to make sure balance is kept forever. One thing I'd like to say is that Zygarde, in this case, I hope gets more characterization, because it did have a lot in the anime, and I do think this is where it needs now. Whereas Zygarde effectively decides that it needs to be a better protector, as it realized it was actually part of the problem the last time with Apocalypse, not putting its foot down and trying to tell Apocalypse to calm down, and basically letting it escape all these times to cause more havoc means that it needs to keep its eye on both of its new legendary companions that it created. As I think 100% Zygarde would start to do an action we would see very often in the animes and the games, as we would see it regress, as instead of it becoming one singular Zygarde, it too appeared on both sides, one shiny for the advancement of the story and another one the regular color, as we would see it regress from the 50% forms into the 10% form, although there's no shiny, but it's okay. And then we would see the formation of two creatures that would begin to form on the further outsides of Zygarde, as the 10% form would dissipate, and finally, with the remnants of these little creatures in the middle, they would emanate their cells across the region, dispersing it as far and wide as they could. And this would result in the creation of both of our core forms, one shiny to differentiate the blue, and one red to differentiate itself too. And from that moment forward, both would proceed on their goal, as each would follow one of the legendaries, staying close behind to make sure that it followed their duties, and in tune, if they ever got out of line, would be prepared to stay and stand them off. As the blue one would watch over Xerneas, as effectively it wanted to make sure it governed life effectively and restored areas that needed it. the red one would obviously follow Yveltal and make sure that it imposed its will of life and death. And that's where we end the theory today. As you can tell, this is the theory effectively of how Zygarde could have created both Xerneas and Yveltal. Now, I just want to preface, this is a fan theory, guys, so don't go too hard on me in the comments, but also, this is because Legends ZA has so much to expand on, and if it doesn't focus on this specific period, that's completely fine. You could still have it, like how in Hisui and we had in Legends Arceus, there was a lot of context we did not get. With the noble hero and the noble Pokemon formations, we pretty much just ended up in another area. So, this is just my theory. And I hope you guys do like it, as more will be coming out. So let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe if you're not, and remember to leave a like. So this is Brad from the Ed Army signing off. And for all of you out there, to sign on.